And go ahead, count down to 5, and then you can go.
So we'll start in 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. So hello everyone, thanks a lot for joining us today on Facebook on Cooperative City in Quarantine. This is our 12th edition. We started this broadcast series 3 months ago when we entered the lockdown, and we wanted to connect local initiatives across Europe to see how they cope with the crisis, the sanitary crisis and the lockdown in the same time. What kind of instruments and methods and solidarity mechanisms did they develop to cope with the crisis? Because we felt that all this discussion was very much closed in nation states and national languages. Now, of course, the situation has changed a lot since then. We are 3 months into that, and we are already coming out of the lockdown. But what we have to face now is that in many places in Europe, many cities, those initiatives that for us are very crucial to keep our cities livable, which keep solidarity networks and which keep community spaces alive, they are facing quite some difficulties in these months, because what we see that community venues, of course, also depend on revenues, and the balance of revenues and expenses, and it's very important for them to be able to organize events, to organize activities that help their balance sheets to be, in balance. So what we thought is that we already talked 2 months ago, we already talked about community centers in the project Active NGOs, that are spaces that accommodate NGOs, mostly municipality run, but this time we thought of focusing on community-led development. Now, community-led development in Europe is being in the last 10 years a very big topic. We've seen a lot of emergent new practices across Europe. We saw the last crisis when it left a lot of empty buildings, for example, across Europe and beyond Europe, of course. We saw that many communities organized themselves to use these buildings for citizen-led initiatives, community activities, solidarity projects. Many cities picked up policies to support these initiatives. In other regions like Hungary, where I'm speaking from right now, it's been more a bottom-up process, more a grassroots process, which without practically any policy help, many initiatives managed to create their own spaces. Today we will talk about this topic, and we have actually a very interesting set of guests. We have city makers, researchers, elected city officials, representatives of philanthropic foundations, who all have a stake and all have a different take in how to help community venues survive this period. We have Karssenberg from Stadmakersfonds. I don't know about my pronunciation.
Perfect, couldn't be better.
Who speaks from Amsterdam with us. We have Hanna Szemző from the OpenHeritage project, and also from MRI. She speaks from Göttingen, am I correct? Okay, I'm always confused about this. We have Gergő Birtalan from Budapest, speaking on behalf of Gólya, a community cooperative and venue. We have Robbert de Vrieze from the Delfshaven neighborhood cooperative, speaking from Rotterdam. Matteo Bagnasco from Turin, speaking on behalf of the Fondazione Compagnia di San Paolo, and Katalin Gennburg from Berlin, from the Berlin Parliament, who's an elected member of the parliament and an urbanist, and is involved in the city's community-led development scene. Also, she's spokesperson on urban development, tourism, and smart city for the LINKE. And of course, last but not least, we have Grauvogel, who's been involved in the Berlin scene in community-led development, and also is spokesman of Kreators network. Christian, can you a little bit describe a little bit, on the one hand, on Kreators, what is this network? What is this phenomenon that we talk about? And also, how do you see the Berlin scene today that I think in the last years has really gone very mature with very large-scale community-led development projects, which are not for profit and which are anti-speculation in an unprecedented way, something that we actually got inspired all across Europe. Christian, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much.
So yes, Recreators is a network for cooperative area development, which was founded in 2014. And the initiative was founded basically because we saw the same mechanisms and the same developments all over Europe. We started to a series of workshops with similar projects, and then we saw that the same processes were basically taking place in a lot of all over Europe after the crisis. So civic initiatives were taking over spaces which were empty and vacant and reactivated them, especially in the beginning of the 2010s, and could actually have long lease contracts or different cooperative models with the help of ethical foundations or ethical banks to secure these places for long lease or for long process. And this was the start of the Recreators network, where we said, okay, we have to basically exchange the knowledge there and see how we can preserve these spaces with a long-term perspective. In Berlin, this was especially in the beginning of the 2010s, a question of space, because there was still space there. Of course, there was already in the 2010s speculation taking place, but there was still the chance and the opportunity for these cooperative and civic-driven initiatives to preserve these spaces. But then during the 2010s, roughly you could see an increase of a lot of speculation and big development projects, which were speculating with rising rents and land prices, and made that even more difficult for community and cooperative projects to preserve these spaces, because the rises of the land prices were so high that you couldn't hold up with these speculative prices. And therefore, especially in Berlin, but I guess this is happening all over Europe as well, it is more important than ever to preserve these spaces, also after the Corona crisis now, as revenues are breaking down, because there's no more scope, no more leverage to preserve these spaces, because if you look at the city center, there's so much speculation going on that it's difficult to find new places if these kind of community centers and civic initiatives lose their spaces.
We'll come back to this also when we talk a little bit about municipal interventions, but because Berlin, based on this big community activism seen in the recent years with the Red-Red-Green coalition, I think there's been a lot of policy innovation as well in this regard. But let's come back to maybe to a context which didn't have such a movement, didn't have this kind of policy innovation. In Budapest, where I'm speaking from, again, there's been, in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of community activism towards opening spaces, but also they were very much exposed to either political pressure, because we had some radical political changes in the last 10 years, which meant that a lot of community initiatives that were renting publicly owned spaces, they were pushed out. Their contracts were closed because they were not necessarily friendly with the new power, or maybe they were not friendly with any power, but this was not enough for the public authorities to maintain or support this kind of civic scene. There was also a lot of political pressure on the civic scene, and also we saw that while there was a lot of space available on the market in the early 2010s because of the crisis, later on, many initiatives that moved into private spaces were pushed out of these private spaces, mostly starting from 2017-18, when somehow the real estate market was back in form. And Gergő from Budapest, from Gólya, he's one of the few people that actually tried something different. You've been running a space called Gólya for a few years, and just 1 or 2 years ago, you moved your initiative into a new venue that you actually collectively bought. Now, I'm curious if you could tell a little bit about this initiative, also in this difficult context of Budapest, and also how you're doing today with the specific situation of the coronavirus.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me and having a chance to present ourselves. Well, we have opened Gólya. Actually, I wasn't a member then, but the Cooperative opened Gólya in 2013. And even before that, they were running a place in a different location. So the cooperative is dating back 8 years now, and now it has 15 members and a history of economic organizing. So right now, even though, as you said, this was a big jump for us to, or a very new thing to try, we were confident because we had this history behind us. Yeah, so we were, as you mentioned, forced out of a rented place, not because of political reasons, but because of economic reasons. The neighborhood that we resided in is placed for a major development project, which is led by the alliance of political leadership and capital interest. And this way they were reforming the whole neighborhood in a very aggressive manner. And we were renting a space which was owned by a private individual. But when he saw the opportunity to sell the building for, I don't know, double, triple the price of what he bought it for, he decided to not prolong our otherwise very precarious contract. And that's why we had to move. And then we had the opportunity to find another space to rent. Since we were already building for years a space for organizing, we saw that it requires stability and infrastructure to be able to actually entrench ourselves locally, to have something that can be called an institution. And we saw that if we are going to look for a rent contract again, that will never be secure, and we won't have this security to actually build and invest or find investors and to grow. So in the end, the only option for us was to buy a building, to gain ownership. And this was a huge jump for us because even though we were gaining numbers, we are still a startup company with no real capital on its own. And we basically had to find funding jumping to huge proportions in our eyes. So it was difficult. I could go into a lot of details, but I'm not going to right now. It was a several years process to gain investors, and in a very convoluted scheme actually to put together the funds necessary to gain this building. And then we had to renovate it all ourselves. I mean, both technically and physically, and both in planning and in every way. And we ended up having a building of 1,200 square meters plus a roof. And we ended up going into an alliance with 8 other organizations, other cooperatives and NGOs. And right now, this alliance has a name, and we are renaming our community house because you presented us as Gólya Community House, and originally this was the case. But now, with the addition of these 8 other organizations, we had to find a new name, an umbrella name, and now it's Kazan Community House. And
okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's very new, very recent. And now our cooperative, which is sustaining itself from hospitality services, is one part of this bigger project, a bigger house, and the others are doing their thing. So
it's a completely bottom-up approach to city making, to build a new, let's say, set of services, a new institution in a semi-peripheral area of the city.
Yeah, exactly. And as you said, it wasn't really a question of choice for us, but this was the path that was available, or we had to make this path. because yeah, there were really we spent a lot of time looking for opportunities, more institutional opportunities to find help in making this a reality, but we couldn't find any, or we were just very little, and yeah, that's what we ended up with.
Okay, let's come back to this later when we'll
Sure.
Look at a little bit your difficulties. I would like to remind our audience that you're free to ask questions, so please address our speakers, because there's a lot of knowledge in this room, and in 1 hour, of course, we cannot take out all of it. So please don't hesitate to ask questions on the Facebook page, and these questions will arrive to us. Christian, yours.
Yeah. So, Robert, how do you see citizen-run spaces in Rotterdam dealing with the crisis, and how is your initiative, the Delfshaven Coöperatie, taking up with the crisis at the moment?
I think they take it up quite good, actually, because for a number of years in the west of Rotterdam, we've been investing in the sort of local resilience and local initiatives. So there's quite a fine-grained network of local initiatives, which sort of all work together. And the interesting thing is that when the shutdown measures were announced here, within 3 days there was a website, a telephone number, a network of volunteers of like 150 people, I think, and which was immediately there to help people adjust to the situation. So in doing shopping for people, but also I was cooking for an old man a little bit down the street from where I live, but also getting laptops for kids who have to do education at home. So I think there was a really productive cooperation between local bottom-up initiatives, but also the municipality and the more welfare organizations, because we sort of practiced with cooperation in the past few years, and that cooperation sort of often went a little bit not so fluidly, so it took a long time. But because we did get some results and some trusts, we had the urgency and the power to within 3 days, just like, now we're going to do it, and we're going to work together, and it doesn't matter where you're from. So maybe I can show you a little bit. I can show you some pictures on the screen, but it was quite an interesting network which was able to act swiftly. And on the other side, we were talking about real estate, about spaces for these kinds of initiatives. There's quite a good infrastructure here, also financially, to make that possible. But you also see that the push of more housing-led and commercial developments. So actually this week I was with an initiative which was the building which was being sold. And so I went to visit there, and the real estate agent was sort of guiding all the interested parties through the building. I was asking, so how is the social zoning? What can you do? Oh no, it's not social. It's just commercial. It's like 100% apartments if you want. And I was like, what the hell? And then I was able to, with a lot of people, to sort of work on the city government and to have this zoning sort of change to the old zoning laws. So now it's going to be a social zone, which means it cannot be sort of commercial-led developments, but there has to be sort of a social component in it. And now we are working with partners to be able to bid on the place, and also to get funds behind it, so that we can take that space out of speculation and make it a place where the neighborhood initiatives for the years to come can have a place to anchor.
Can you tell a little bit about? Sorry, please, Christian.
Do you see any loss of revenue for your organizations to keep up this work and get real estate out of the speculation market, or is that wasn't that affecting you?
Yeah, I think for the normal functioning, a lot of people are working on volunteers and have sort of budgets which run through, so that they can do their program, so they can do homework class or a cultural event. But you see that these initiatives are sort of reframing their program into these aid programs. But yeah, I think for acquiring real estate, you need quite a lot of money. So this is in the process of getting that. So there are some funds interested in that, but yeah, we're not there yet to be able to compete with the bigger developers.
Thanks a lot. And Robert, you're also speaking from different, maybe not with different heads right now, but you were elected in the Rotterdam City Council, if I'm correct, and also were City Maker of the Year. So later on, when we come back to how can cities help actually, or who can help initiatives that are in trouble, we would also count on this perspective of yours.
Sure.
Let's move to Hanna. Hanna, you've been working on a research project, OpenHeritage, that is very much drawing inspiration of partly from the Berlin scene where we saw the emergence of new ethical solidarity funds to buy properties for community use. We also draw inspiration from Turin, co-managed spaces between municipality, social workers, and with the help of philanthropic foundations like Compagnia di San Paolo. So there's a lot of experiences that you actually oversee in OpenHeritage, and also with OpenHeritage you help some new experiments unfold. Can you tell us a little bit of this project, and also how do you see that they're experiencing this crisis?
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'll just very briefly. So this is a research project, an Age 2020 project, which is funded solely by the Commission. And this is, I think the lines are, it's a very fine line of difference. We practically focus on adaptive reuse. So in a way, we don't focus on all different types of bottom-up initiatives. So this is our target. We do just as Levente was mentioning. We it's a 4-year project, and our main aim will be at the end to have a heritage management model that allows the reuse and maintenance of these places in a sustainable way. We really imagine it in a bottom-up way, but we actually do have an initiative that's run by the municipality. So in a bit, the focus is a bit different, but we do have these labs, what we call in 6 altogether, one in Italy, in Hungary, in Poland, in the UK, in Germany, and in Portugal. So you see we kind of cover Europe, and some are situated in cities, like we have one in Lisbon, and we have one in Warsaw, but we do have very rural sites. We have just, for example, one, an archaeological site in the outside of Budapest, and I think that's also important, that we don't only focus on buildings, we also focus on sites. So you don't and use the sites as catalysts of community development. Regarding the initiatives, while I was thinking through about them, probably the most important and how they have been affected by the situation is that they used to dream big, and my experience is now that they dream a bit smaller now. I think it's this entire the COVID crisis generally, but it would have been through any crisis, is that there has been a shift lately where people were actually really enthusiastic about alternative financial sources, about alternative methods of development. And what I see now, there is a bit of stepping back, feeling that they are very good and we definitely have to use them, but we need the public support, basically, really either as a safety net or just, a last resort. What if I would have to summarize, I would say that those labs which have been better embedded into their current into their environment have been surviving better, and also one experience is there. We do have one particular case in Warsaw, in the Praga neighborhood, which is a working class neighborhood, who have been working very much online even previously, which seems a very big advantage now. This is a very big shift from taking an offline community and turning it into an online. That's often taken granted as an easy one, which actually is very difficult. But they started as they are the only lab that started within our project, and they started also developing their online community. And because of this, this sort of was a defense for them. So in a way, even though they are very new and they are not as embedded as the other ones, so I'm a bit contradicting what I said before, this online situation seems very helpful to them.
This embeddedness is a very important point. We heard from Gergő in Budapest. Yeah. We heard in Rotterdam that this kind of community backing is very important. Did you see any role from municipalities, for example, here in helping them, or did they ever actually face a bigger crisis in this moment, or they relatively weathered well?
I think that this is for them, as I understand, for those, this is the biggest crisis so far. Our UK lab, for example, in Sunderland, which is a particularly interesting case because it's actually probably it's important to know this is an area that has been the hardest hit by the COVID infections now, and this is an area which voted overwhelmingly for Brexit. So you can imagine it's a socially very challenging place. But they, I think even though they are working on refurbishing 3 abandoned buildings on the high street of Sunderland. And they, for example, they did have to postpone all the activities they were before doing it, but they cannot rely on the municipality financially. That's why the charity organization that's working on was entrusted with the buildings in the first place. But they can rely on the municipality's support in any other way, and that has actually been my experience with all the other with the labs as well. And we can the ones that have had good relations with the municipality can count on them at least as a not right now not as a financial options, but some other kind of support.
Thanks.
Katalin, you're not only elected member of the Berlin Parliament, but also an urbanist by training and a spokesperson for urban development and tourism. So you have been dealing a lot with the negative effects of tourism in the last years. Now all of a sudden we're facing a situation where there's no more tourists in Berlin, and a lot of these community spaces, of course, are also depending on incomes of tourists. So how do you see these community spaces and citizen-run spaces dealing with the crisis at the moment in Berlin? And what particular problems are they facing? So do you see actually the matter of space as a crucial aspect? Like what happens if these kind of initiatives and projects are losing the space? Or are there actually other problems they're facing at the moment?
Thank you, Christian, for all the questions. I think it's a bit of everything, as it is always a mix of everything. I think the crisis hits as different projects in very different ways. I have seen some little projects with very interesting ideas that started immediately before the crisis came up, and they had, of course, big problems to now survive everything. We as the government decided very early to give the people who are self-deployed, like solo Selbstständige, we call it, to give them 5,000 euro to survive the crisis. And as well as we are a so-called social state, not that social as we wanted, but let's say a social state, people have the possibility to get social welfare, which depends a lot from the situation in other countries. So the crisis in general is totally different in Germany. And in the beginning, we were seeing the pictures in Italy, and we were looking forward, and we were a lot afraid of getting the same situation, and that did not happen. But in this situation, there was like a lot of networks starting, like Telegram groups, starting for community help, people were putting papers on houses to give their help to older people, to people who need help. So there was a lot of things going on, but then as we saw, the crisis were not the same as we see in other countries. It went a totally different way. But as we see now, the tourism did not, it's not the same anymore. Of course, the city is hit very hard. We have a big crash on unemployment rate, and we are now facing like a rental crisis from the income of people, and that is that people paying for their housing is also very difficult. But self-employed, like restaurants and so on, have a lot higher prices to pay. So we see that there are 10 times higher rates are to sell and to give, and this is really, really hard. And we are only in the 3rd month of the crisis, so we did not know what will go on. So this is the part where we politically discuss now how to cut the rents to give give them more space to survive. But yeah, this is really difficult because we also have to deal with the federal government and so on. What I can say about the project in general, there's a big upcoming of new projects as well. The digitalization, as we are here together now, is going around, and you can really see that this is the old idea of digital platform cooperativism is now having a breakthrough. This is really good. And as a government, we really have to think about giving more funding. We as the Left Party are looking forward to give like a fund, cooperative, digital cooperative fund to push those initiatives that are not only commercial. And now, as we have the time to support digital initiatives that are counter initiatives to like the big global players like food delivery platforms and so on, we really have to take the chance. And so I would say there are still many chances in the room, but as well, we are now really see that the crisis hits people very hard.
Thanks. One short another question. Do you see also cultural spaces, community centers, being faced with losing, like if they have a cooperative model or if they own it, or maybe they're just giving rents? Do you see a problem that these spaces are actually now facing the risk of losing their space and not having the opportunity to regain these spaces more or less in the city center, as they are facing a loss of revenues?
Well, as far as I know, this is not the situation yet. Community centers are mostly organized by the city itself. So there are different conditions because most of them are situated in public housing blocks. So this is a good thing. But I mean, culture in general is really hit very hard, as you know. Berlin, as a so-called club culture city, is now really hit very hard. I mean, we have the club who have to pay their rents, and they have no perspective now because, of course, the situation for the clubbing people is you cannot reopen until the pandemic is organized in any way, and so this is really a big problem that we are now looking that clubs on plots that are owned by the state, to give them like the possibility to not pay their rents, but still as well, these are all like in the middle of a big financial crisis as well. This is not really easy to deal with. So I think, yeah, we will talk about all those things and instruments in the next months a lot, because I guess we will need a lot more money to give in cultural projects to make them survive the crisis. And yeah, this is, I have no good news.
Yeah, speaking of the culture sector or the tourism, I think we also, as you said, Katalin, we all looked at Italy with a lot of fear, actually, and you know, if there are some countries which are really dependent on tourism, Italy is one of them. How do you see, Matteo, the situation in Italy? Matteo, you are part of a foundation that has been supporting citizen initiatives for decades. I mean, your foundation was established more than 400 years ago, so it's quite, I'm always impressed by that. But you also have a very specific relationship with community spaces. The city of Turin has a number of neighborhood houses where Compagnia Paolo, your foundation, has actually a lot of involvement and financial help. So how do you see the situation of all these spaces that you support right now with the coronavirus?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Our foundation is involved in supporting culture in a very wide way. So we support culture from the performing arts, the museum system. We promoted in the last years audience development projects. We support creative sectors. When the crisis and the pandemic and the lockdown started, we realized that the crisis was pushing the cultural sector in a very different ways. In some cases, for example, in the performing arts sector, we try to confirm our support in order to reschedule the programs, and at the same time try to give a support for the performing arts organization so they can survive to the crisis. From other cases, in museums, for example, the one that are not blockbuster museums, let's say, there was not suffering so much the crisis, because if public sector and foundation confirmed their support in a certain way that they had the way to survive. We realized there was a sort of sector that are the one concerning public spaces, independent cultural sectors, civic engagement centers, that are the ones that in the last years survived with their own resources, without a specific public funding, but even our foundation funding, something that grew with their own force, let's say. But this kind of center was the one that was suffering in a stronger way the lockdown moment, because they had a more economic, sustainable model, not only based on public or philanthropic funding, and this was for us a problem because this kind of network on our region, we thought it will be a great resources at the end of the lockdown, when citizens had again the opportunity to meet again, and the more institutional spaces, theaters, museums, and other kind of cultural centers are not always with the same time open to citizenship. So we thought to launch an extraordinary lines of intervention, a call for application that was called Rincontriamoci. I don't know how to translate something like let's meet up again, something like that. That was addressed to this kind of small centers that didn't need a lot of money to survive. In sometimes was some small grants in order to support rents, people who are working there that are self-employed, temporary workers with no social safety nets. We gather 100 of application. We support 147 centers in all our region, and that, I think, for us is not only a way to help this kind of network that is a resource for the restarting of our region, but was also for us the chance to have a sort of survey and an overlook of what this kind of network is doing in our territory. Is something is not only so visible for big foundation like ours or for the public sectors. So it's a sort for us of a database of experiences that now in the emergency moments we are trying to support with this extraordinary measure. But in the future we can study more and try to think some more not special, but more normal, let's say, ordinary, new lines of intervention. Because in our foundation, after a rethinking of our lines based on the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 agenda, there is one focus, one mission on active participation and engagement of citizens. And so this is for us the chance to also rethink the way of funding of our foundation.
Well, sorry, what were the experiences of this call for proposals on your side? Did you discover a lot of new initiatives? Were there a lot of interest in joining the getting funded from you?
We discover new stakeholder, let's say, because the 80% of this kind of cultural center never applied to any calls of our foundation before, for example. It's a sort of bottom-up cultural center that try to make it on their own. And that's a good thing. But we feel the responsibility in this lockdown, 3-month lockdown, to do something for them. That's the idea. And that's also, as I said before, a way to rethink how to reorder our way of intervention in participative culture.
Thank you. We'll get back to this when we talk about, in general, how can we help these initiatives?
Hans, you're based in Amsterdam or in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands are often perceived as a city maker paradise. As we already heard from Robbert, there's this collaboration between several initiatives and the municipality and other stakeholders. You created together with the region of Utrecht a City Makers Fund, the Stadmakersfonds, to help these collaborative initiatives we were talking about. How do you see these initiatives are dealing with the crisis at the moment, and is this affecting also the work of the Stadmakersfonds at the moment? I saw that you were planning a launch of the Stadmakersfonds during the crisis, so that had to be digital, of course, but beside that, how is this affecting as well your work?
Yeah, thank you, Christian. We're thinking about this very much, of course, because we're still very much we feel in the early stages of this crisis. So it's also a little bit hard to predict what will happen exactly. But so far, the initiatives that we are in touch with are still going through. They turn out to be resilient enough, and they're optimistic on their models. And I think one of the reasons might be that they have really carefully been working to build a very varied financial model underneath their initiative, and for the initiative not to be just only subsidy dependent. So I think that's a strong aspect of these initiatives, and this is also the type of initiative that we aim to help with the Stadmakersfonds. It's a fund that is meant to provide a loan at a really low interest rate for Stadmaker initiatives who want to acquire the building or their land or both to sustain their position in the city and to be able to scale up. Well, we've learned from our own experience, being a Stadmaker as well. We actually failed to do what Gergő managed to do. So it's super good to hear the Gólya story or the Kazen story, because this is really a way to sustain your presence in the city. And we strongly see, of course, that the Stadmakers, the city makers, the recreated type initiatives are very valuable for the cities. They bring values that nobody else brings to the cities. They help to make the city more circular, more inclusive, more attractive, more social. And they kind of operate in a vacuum that was probably created in the previous crisis, I would say. So I think it's super important for the cities to and our societies to have these Stadmakers in our cities, in cities with high pressure, because they provide something that the market forces don't provide. In cities with low pressure or areas with low pressure, low market pressure, because very often they're the only ones who are taking an initiative to start with. So this is also why with the Stadmakersfonds we thought it would be important to provide a new financial infrastructure for these initiatives that wasn't there before.
Thanks. But do you have the feeling that these city makers and these projects we're talking about are a bit more fragile because, as you mentioned, they kind of operating outside of the traditional mechanisms and outside of these traditional economic parameters? So do you have the feeling that they could be a bit more fragile to the crisis and to a loss of revenue because they're not based on just the highest economic outcome, right?
Yeah,
So.
yeah, of course. Yeah, but look, we are all fragile right now, right? And so yes, Stadmakers as well. A lot of the Stadmaker initiatives have a financial model that is based on having a building with a community of tenants, each paying a rent or whichever construction they want to use as a cooperative model. And of course, if initiatives are getting into more severe circumstances and decide not to rent anymore, and there's going to be fewer tenants, then there's the immediate fragility, or is that a word, of these initiatives, of course, and of the funding model. However, we also see that very often these initiatives are very networked, and one of the partners we work together with is Bijtske Boonstra of the University of Rotterdam, and she's been researching Stadmakers for a long time, finding out that the Stadmakers are the most resilient, who are the best networked, because the situation changes all the time. The context in which you work changes all the time, and you need to adapt constantly your model, and then you need to be able to rely on having a big network, which is a function that we also hope to provide. That the Stadmakers that we help to fund, we also help to connect and exchange their knowledge, because that's a way of being resilient as well, I think.
Thank you, Hans. Speaking of resilience, even the Forbes magazine published an article a few weeks ago. It's not that I'm reading Forbes, but it came through. Speaking of companies that have added value, like a social value, they did much better in this crisis. Now, what we see on the ground here, for example, in Budapest, is that many, let's say, businesses that were based on practically profit making and taking a private profit out immediately, they closed immediately, and many other businesses that were trying to make actually a lot of compromises or concessions, to keep their stuff running, and they started to, you know, provide different kinds of services, started food delivery, all kinds of things. They actually survived this moment, and I think it's a very, very important discussion when we think about this new economy that is coming. Now everybody talks about what will change in the world, and I think there's a potential important space for these community spaces, city maker initiatives in this new economy. Now, we would like to focus a little bit on solutions, because you all hinted to what should be done or what has already been done, or what you would need actually. But before that, please think about this, because we will ask you in general, what do you think should be done? What do you think your spaces what kind of help would you most need, or what do you see around you? What kind of help is offered to these spaces? But before that, we have a few questions coming from the audience. Bahanu from Vienna mentions that in Austria, the culture minister has had to resign since businesses were prioritized over culture. National Rescue is in danger, but there's a lot of foundations like European Cultural Foundation that actually also made a solidarity fund to help initiatives. And this a little bit corresponds to what Matteo said. So this is a question to Matteo. You're also chair of European Foundation Center, so you have a connection with a lot of other philanthropic foundations. How do you see that foundations mobilize themselves to help in, to chip in money or other resources where some states and some, let's say, cities fail to jump in?
First, I want to say that foundation and in general philanthropic bodies are very different from a country to another. In some cases, there are a sort of partner of local authorities, like in Italy, for example. In some other cases, there are a sort of different subject that is in a dialectic situation with public governments. So even in our network of European Foundation Center, we can see this kind of difference. I will say that there is a debate, for example, in Italy, in how philanthropy and foundation can help cultural sector in this moment. I see 3 points mainly. The first one is how can not only work as a grant-making foundation with lost fund granting, but how can we also dedicate financial tools to the cultural sector. This is not because we don't want to give grants, but how we can mobilize a higher level of resources with other kind of tools. And this is something, for example, in Italy, that cultural sector is not ready enough to react, in my opinion. The second one that is strongly connected with this one, in many cases, cultural operators need to rethink their way of working. And so a second point for me is how to support capacity building project and process for cultural centers. And the last one is something that we are discussing a lot, not only in Italy, but even at European level, how we can rethink the supports, not only dedicated to single project, but moving from the project to the subject, the organization, the NGOs that, or the public body that is working. So how not to how not to ask too many projects in order to have funding, but how to reflect on the whole organization and how we can fund and help them to develop. This is something we are thinking about, because from the other side, philanthropic bodies need to have the opportunity to change programs, so not to adopt a single way from along years. So this is always a way to think a sort of exit strategy in some ways.
Thank you, Matteo. We have a question to Robbert from Greece, where Dimitris says that in a way, Greece had already a lot of solidarity structures ready, learning from the last crisis. So when this crisis arrived, there was actually, you know, everybody knew what to do. There was all this bottom-up solidarity network in place. And you mentioned that the solidarity networks in place, and they were actually very functioning very well. The question is a little bit, what role did city makers and the spaces that we talk about now have in this network, while they couldn't necessarily accommodate people or events? And also you, as insights or collaboration in the municipality, what help do you see from the municipality, if there's any, or what do you think would be needed from the municipality?
I think the role of city makers, and then I'm talking in the broad sense of the word, not just the white, highly educated people who do a fun project with cappuccino, but the broader sense of it, often from a religious background. They were the ones to act the fastest, because they sort of were able to, I think Hans also said that, to react very swiftly to changing conditions. So this is what you need in times of crisis, because that's really important. And yeah, it's about, if you have the previous experience, like in Greece, then there are structures and ideas laying around. So if you have that, then you can sort of build upon that, because in a crisis you sort of look around, what's there, and then you're going to pick that. And on the question of what a government can do, I think I sometimes bitch about the city of Rotterdam, about the corrupting power of money and stuff like that. But what the city of Rotterdam does very good, actually, is that they have a really intricate, layered financial infrastructure to finance cooperative initiatives. So you have like a really small initiative to like 300 euros with your street, with your neighbors. You can do something. You can just ask it. You need 5 signatures and you can get it. And up to 10,000 euros, you can get your initiative for the whole neighborhood, like a community garden or a local community center. You can have that financed with 10,000 euros. And then you have City Lab subsidies up to 100,000 euros for the more citywide initiative. So I think that final infrastructure, if you can make that sustainable and last for a long time, then you see local initiatives grow. There's a sort of a means of existence, sort of an economy arising. And you see that that economy, in terms of what it's like the return on investment or the value they create, is like huge, because at the same time they do like homework classes, but they also provide a meeting point. They do something with the outside space. So that's a huge value. And I think in this crisis, what I was saying, the initiatives which are ready to sort of jump at it because they have this history of working together, that value is being seen right now.
Thanks a lot. Hans wants to jump in.
Yeah, because I really like this layered financial model that Robbert is talking about. And I think there's another layer on top of that, because then if you, as a city maker, you would like to sustain your presence, then you're talking about different types of money all of a sudden. So in the Stadmakersfonds, for instance, we have 6 million euros, which is good to fund, let's say, around 10 projects probably in the province of Utrecht. And we think we should do much more. Just to, maybe I should say a little bit about how the Stadmakersfonds works. It was an initiative of us, Stipo, Stadmakers, city makers, and Stadkwadraat. Stadkwadraat are financial experts. We created this separate entity, a foundation, and the province of Utrecht stepped in first as a government, regional government level. They provided the first money to get the fund going. And then with that money, we could go to the social bank, Triodos Bank, to multiply it. So this is how we got to this amount of money. And I think another thing governments can really do right now is to make sure there's similar funds getting started. We have the ambition to grow from Utrecht to a national fund, and we would actually hope to grow into a European entity or a solidarity system with similar European funds, because we really think that now is the best time to have this. This is also why we decided to go ahead with this national launch, because we need it, especially now. In the previous crisis, we saw that after 3 years when the crisis hit, the real estate market was at its lowest point. And we want better balance in our cities, right? We don't want just the cities to be about international conglomerates and larger scale corporations buying up all the property. Well, the question in this crisis is going to be, who is going to be buying up all that property that will come available on the market in the next 3 years? And if you know it's going to be at the deepest point, who is going to be the winning party of this crisis? Is it going to be the investors with the deepest pockets, or are we using this now to create a better balance in our cities, and to at least make sure that some of that property also ends up in the hands of city makers, civic initiatives, more public entities? So I think we have a big opportunity at the moment, but in order to do so, we really need to scale up our financial efforts. And the money in the Stadmakersfonds is revolving money. It's not giveaway money, it's revolving money. So it comes back to the government. So it's almost a fairly easy thing to do for a public entity, but also for private investors who want to step in. They can also step in, of course.
Hanna, you have with the project OpenHeritage, you have quite a good overview over European projects and initiatives. Just what Hans mentioned, what they're doing in the Netherlands, what kind of opportunities do you see there to bring that on a European scale? Do you see the chance to adapt this model to other European countries, or even just think that on a European-wide scale?
I think it's a very good question, because as Hans was speaking, I was actually thinking that I'm a great believer personally on municipal involvement, and I see the role of European level very important, because then how comes my Central or Eastern European hat is that actually the initiatives that would need these seed money the most, actually mostly are located in countries where the municipalities are less friendly than in Berlin or in Rotterdam. So this is, I actually would really see it, I would definitely see a role on the European level, both through municipalities or setting up separate funds, probably, given that I'm not experienced in how you actually do, unlike Matteo, how you actually do a funding process when you actually fund separate initiatives. But I think it would be very important to do this, do something about this imbalance, because this is, I think, the project like Gergő's is a bit unique. I mean, I'm also originally from Budapest, and I could follow other initiatives and who were trying housing initiatives, trying to establish cooperatives, not ownership cooperatives, but rental cooperatives. And you ran against walls. The ethical banks function differently under a different institutional environment. So it's somehow that you end up going to a vicious circle that could be stopped with some municipal seed money, like in the case of Utrecht, and you would definitely need the European help in this. So.
Thank you, Hanna. There's a question to Katalin, who spoke about helping platform cooperatives, or platform cooperatives could actually take the place of big multinational companies when it comes to food delivery, or tourism has disappeared, but maybe there's a new kind of tourism. So I would ask Katalin a little bit on this. What can a municipality do to help these initiatives? Because very often these platform cooperatives or social economy actors, they're organized around these community spaces that we talk about. What can you do to help this kind of new economy coming up? And maybe also, because this is the question of Elena in Geneva, is how could we help a new kind of tourism be born from this crisis as well?
Thank you for both questions. I think for the platform cooperativism, you really need actors, like political actors, that support those initiatives and make them visible. I will try now to speak about it in the committees and push this forward. And then at the end of the day, you really have to make clear that there's a way to go. We really have to decide which side we are on. Do we want to give our city away to the big global platforms, to give the data away and whatever? All those questions of what we have to decide now about technologies and data and what's up, and as well, we as a smart city, a so-called smart city Berlin, really have to decide what kind of smart city do we want. And there is, lucky us, now an alternative. You can decide to go the way of Barcelona or not, or of Amsterdam, for example. So this is the first thing. And I think, of course, it's always about the money. You really have to give a fund. And I'm really glad that you gave the example, Hans, of the Stadmakersfonds, because I really want to, I will have a research on this later, but what came to my mind is it's not that easy to make clear that these are Stadmakers or city makers and these not, because we have, of course, every city, every country has different kinds of fundings. And as we have special funds for artists or for several different workers, it's not that easy to say, okay, now we make the Stadmakersfonds, but where is the what is different? What special community do we address? So this is what I really have to think about later, but I take it with me from today. So thank you very much for that. When it comes to tourism, I'm very happy about this question, because this is what I missed in the first question, unfortunately, because I think we really have to need the crisis, to take the crisis as a really, the time now to change the tourism politics in general, because what we see now is tourism economy is not resilient at all. It is now, we are in big trouble. And I mean, as you may know, and I guess in your cities, there are initiatives as well that struggle against the results of big tourism. We really have to think about new ways and local tourism and more, let's say, not only ecological tourism. It is not about tourists who use bicycles, but it is about the way of working. What working conditions do we have? How can we go out of the system of global hotel networks and so on? And I think in general, we really have to confront the situation of as well platforms like Airbnb and so on. How can we support, like with cooperative platforms like Airbnb, an alternative? So we have the alternatives, but we really have to support it. And this is, I think the tourism in connection to the question of city makers and cultural heritage in cities, we really have to end the period of selling cities due to cultural events and whatever. And this is really a way to go. But I think in science, there are a lot of people, urbanists, who are saying this all the time. But in politics, it's really hard to find partners for this future way to go.
Thank you, Katalin. It's very inspiring to see actually policymakers, decision makers to be on board for this, because you know, a new kind of tourism is on the agenda for many of us. Actually, it's a very important step forward for all our cities. We're running a little bit beyond our schedules, so I would like to finish with Gergő, as we started with Gergő, asking him of what he would need, what they would need as city makers on the ground. But before that, just two comments from the audience. Bejtske Bunstra, our colleague from Rotterdam, actually, it also is involved in Open Heritage. She says that what she likes about the Rotterdam financial infrastructure is that it's one-time finance, so initiatives don't become dependent on subsidies. But with this one-time finance, networks are being built, and this really increases the resilience in the city. So this is something we can learn from, and we can also share with our networks and our projects. And there's also a reminder by Chanda Vender about the 50 million euro cooperative housing fund in the city of Amsterdam. And we have a link for this as well. So it seems we have a critical mass from Holland, which is good, because we always get inspired from this. But back to Gergő, on your concrete needs, what would you need? Who could help you if you actually need help at all?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just laughing because you mentioned these big numbers, and actually a small fraction of this money would be enough to you know, buy us our building, and then we'll be on our merry way for the next 50 years. It's really funny, but of course, global differences. So a lot of things you mentioned are actually very relatable to me or us, because when this whole crisis happened, we had to find another way to make revenue, because we don't have any so we don't have any money saved up. All of our efforts were put into this moving and financing this moving, and the personal savings of the members, for example, were all invested, and we had to find a way to make to actually pay the rent for the members and buy food from 1 month to the next. And this was a big jump. Hopefully, yeah, luckily, we already started a second enterprise. So we're not only financing ourselves from the hospitality services, because with the experiences we gained during the renovation of our building, we also started to take jobs renovating other people's houses. So we entered a different trade, and then from one day to the next, we also launched a delivery service with cargo bikes and bikes, which is also an experience we had. But yeah, so we had to do that from one day to the next to supplement the income that we lost. And for this courier service, we actually applied for a small loan, as one of you mentioned. Sometimes a little money is enough, and we asked the foundation to help us buy vehicles, cargo bike vehicles, freight, let's just say cargo bikes. And in exchange, we offered that we will spare time during a working week to help deliver care packages in the neighborhood to people who need it, which were actually assembled by volunteers and paid for from a solidarity fund, which is organized locally in the neighborhood. And this way, this money that was invested helps us to do more delivery jobs, to gain more income, to employ more people. It helps people in the neighborhood to get what they need. And it is also a long time investment. So it's tools that will be used by the community and in the community locally. And this is just a very small example, but what we need most is investment in tools and equipment and yeah, real estate too, or buildings, and everything that can be used locally and will not use value even when everything crashes. So yeah, what we need to do is to secure value locally, to involve funds, but then be able to circulate it locally to always help expand what we can do. And I don't see ourselves mostly as just a place. So we're not making a place, we're trying to create a local alliance. And that's what's most important, that we're always involving new people, and involving new people helps us to gain strength, but not just in a sentimental sense, but in the very real sense that all these new people are bringing their labor power, their connections, and everything. So if you fund these local connected social enterprises or alliances of people, you will put money to good use, and as you also said, it's going to multiply, and it has been proven several times. I don't believe in this very corporate sense of social value that you can quantify it with currency, but in fact it's true that by investing in these initiatives, you will have more satisfied people in the end, so more services and as such. So what we would need is funds invested in these kind of things, more importantly housing, local food supply, and essential services, and that's it. But these have to be given to cooperatives or enterprises that have a strict policy on not making profits and involving workers, members, community members in decision making in a very democratic way. So this has to be the deciding factor, and actually that's what we need. Another thing is that
Gergő, can I ask you a
I'm
question?
sorry.
How many
Yeah, sure.
initiatives do you know of in Budapest who would like to buy their building?
I'm not really sure. We had to think big, but as long as you have some kind of rental contract, it's not it's a huge jump. It's a very huge leap of faith to do that, because right now we are in the debt with a huge amount, and nobody wants huge debt on their head for decades. So I'm not sure of the answer, because they're not even thinking about the question, and I'm not blaming them, or it's not yeah. But even so, as you said, you're very true that someone is going to come and someone is going to buy up all the property, and we actually have to be there to stop it, because otherwise it's just going to be another circle or another process of buying up the real estate, making these huge, very environmentally pollutant construction projects to sell houses for investment purposes or hotels. And even in our neighborhood, it's going to happen because the property is there and they will do it. And it's actually in our long-term strategy to build up an alliance with neighbors to stop that when it will eventually happen. So yeah. Another thing I just wanted to quickly mention, that since we are in the bike delivery business right now, and I'm riding on the streets for 30 hours per week, and I'm meeting a lot of bike couriers. It's really important to help financially these platform cooperatives, and it's also important to help them in the way of policy, because these multinational companies are just the worst in employing people. They don't follow the rules, and that's the main purpose for their market advantage. So if they are forced to follow the labor code, they will lose their market advantage, and it will put platform cooperatives in a good position. On the other hand, these platform cooperatives have to do their share of work by organizing bike couriers or tenants, or in any way. These platform cooperatives do a number of things, but in fact, until there isn't enough critical mass of people, it will not mean a thing to invest money in them, because they will only be able to prevail and muscle out these big companies if they reach a big enough union of people. So sitting in a municipality office, there's not much you can help in that way. There have to be like labor activists on the street to do that. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just a lot of things you mentioned that really ring bells for me, and I had to share. I'm sorry for being.
No, thank you, Gergő. This is very important because here we have an agenda for a future urban economy, and it was a perfect call out to funders, municipalities on the local level, on the national level, on the European level. Not everybody is listening to us, but many people are listening to us, and we try to create these kinds of alliances internationally, as well as on the neighborhood level. So this is very important. I think we're losing some of our speakers because we have been running out of time. So thank you for Robbert, who already left us. Thank you, Gergő, for your contributions. Hans, Katalin, Matteo, Hanna. Thank you very much for being here with us before your weekend starts. And thank you, especially Christian, for sharing this moderation with me. Please follow us on Cooperative City. Next week, we'll be back with an issue on social inclusion. Of course, there was a lot about social inclusion today as well, but we'll go more in depth about this topic next week. And hope to see you all very soon and we can work together on these topics. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks.